One of the most controversial practices in today's energy industry is a process known as hydraulic fracturing or fracking. Now, if this is the first time you're learning about fracking, here's a quick breakdown. It's a form of drilling for natural gas and shale rock that involves pumping hundreds of thousands of gallons of water, chemicals, and sand into the ground. And while effective at extracting gas, the practice has been heavily criticized for a laundry list of damaging side effects to human health and the environment. Among them, an increased risk of earthquakes. Take Oklahoma, for example, a state not known for having any seismic activity. It reported a record 109 earthquakes measuring 3.0 or higher just last year. 109. And that record was broken within the first 4 months of this year. Because apparently the wind doesn't just blow in Oklahoma, the ground shakes as well, all thanks to deep underground drilling that apparently Mother Nature doesn't agree with. In fact, the US Geological Survey has added new measuring stations across the state to keep up with the quakes. And in a new report issued just this week, USGS scientists said that oil and natural gas drilling is a likely contributing factor to the quakes. You think? Aside from Oklahoma's earthquake outbreak, increased seismic activity has been reported in non-earthquake prone states such as Texas, Ohio, Arkansas, Pennsylvania, all believed to be linked to fracking. Of course, fracking isn't just leading to man-made earthquakes, though. The practice has been proven to be linked to birth defects and other human health ailments. In a groundbreaking victory, one family who's faced deteriorating health effects from groundwater poisoning linked to fracking won a $3 million lawsuit. But fighting a continued practice has been anything but easy. In fact, this story is 1 in a million, as fracking companies often go to great lengths to silence any opposition to their drilling. That's certainly the case of Vera Scroggins, a Pennsylvania anti-fracking activist who was legally banned from a number of public and private establishments in her hometown. The ban was issued by a local judge who sided with Cabot Oil, one of the biggest gas and energy companies in Pennsylvania, which also happens to own and lease properties in over 40% of the county where Scroggins lives. RT Correspondent Marina Portnaya joined me earlier, and I first asked her to break down the latest on the case.
Well, Vera is a fearless and passionate activist, determined to shine the biggest spotlight possible on the fracking industry. You have to understand that for more than 5 years, she's been leading bus tours of the Marcellus Shale gas field in Montrose, Pennsylvania, showing visitors what fracking has done to her community. She has hosted Yoko Ono, Sean Lennon, Susan Sarandon, U.S. officials as well as foreign officials. Now, this 63-year-old is also a citizen journalist. She's documented and uploaded over 400 videos exposing the consequences of fracking to YouTube, particularly focusing on the type of environmental damage it's causing. Why is it important to know this? Because Cabot Oil and Gas Corporation is one of the biggest drillers in Pennsylvania, and clearly the publicity Vera's been giving them is not flattering, to say the least. They wanted to silence her and shut her down. So in October, a court injunction brought in by the company restricted Vera from entering upon more than 300 square miles owned or leased by Cabot. This meant that she wasn't able to document what the company was doing, what kind of fracking was taking place. She wasn't even able to peacefully protest fracking in general. Now, according to reports, Cabot insisted that Vera's activism distracted their employees from working and interfered with natural gas production. The company also accused Vera of trespassing on their property. But as we know from my report, a judge recently scaled down that injunction. Right now, she just has to remain 100 feet away from any access roads or sites belonging to Cabot.
What kind of damages or environmental impacts have we seen fracking cause in her home state?
We have to understand that this type of fracking is being done next to homes, schools, farmland, on top of farmland. Many in the community are extremely concerned that the chemicals that are being pumped into the ground will eventually seep back up, go into the food that is being grown, ultimately sold to us, food that we are going to consume. So there's a lot of concerns that are being raised not just in Pennsylvania, throughout the country. You've been covering the story nonstop, but to see it up close in Pennsylvania, to talk to Vera is quite telling on how concerning this circumstance is.
Definitely a lot more to be learned about the practice. Thanks so much for being on the ground doing just that, Marina. Really appreciate it.
Sometimes trying to do good and save your community can turn against you. Enter anti-fracking activist Vera Scroggins, whose story we've been following this year. She was stopped from getting to her local supermarket and even the hospital after being banned from getting close to land owned by a fracking company. Marina Portnaya has been hearing about a recent rare victory in Vera's long legal battle.
You could see the equipment there. This pipeline, the connection here, they call it a pig.
Pennsylvania resident Vera Scroggins has spent more than 5 years leading a public battle against one of the biggest and most controversial industries.
I follow trucks around, see where the fracking's going on. I show them sites from the road, whatever the different phases, excavation, drilling, fracking, flaring, and then, of course, the compressor stations, then the pipeline construction. That's all over the place like a web, like a spider web. Show them that. And then I take them to people who have been harmed.
Last year, Cabot Oil and Gas Corporation, one of the biggest drillers in the state, attempted to silence Vera. A court injunction brought in by the company restricted her from entering upon more than 300 square miles owned or leased by Cabot.
The lights, the crane, you see that crane there?
It's one of the most extreme measures ever taken against an anti-fracking activist.
I couldn't go, let's say, to all the stores I normally go to. I couldn't go to the new hospital nearby. I couldn't go to, let's say, my vet for my dog. I couldn't go to some of the restaurants that I was used to going to.
But Vera and the anti-fracking opposition refused to back down, and last month they finally prevailed. A judge significantly eased the injunction.
I'm going to stay on this edge to keep that 100-foot buffer.
She is now required to remain 100 feet away from a dozen properties owned by Cabot, as well as active drilling sites, gas wells, and access roads.
It's very important that we got the injunction scaled back last month, and we hope that protesters will understand, and the Cabot will understand too, that there is a First Amendment in this country protecting the rights of advocates, even ones who have messages that big companies like Cabot may not want to hear.
Now, right behind me is a fracking site in action. Water, chemicals, and sand being pumped into the ground. In order for Vera to observe the action without violating her injunction, she stands on the private property of a Pennsylvania resident who happens to live right across the street from the fracking site.
We're going to go to a fracking site just up the road, about a mile up the road.
When RT met up with Vera, she was touring a group of activists around the county, exposing the dangers many experts have linked to fracking.
They want to scare people into keeping quiet, but it's not going to work because we care enough about our state and our planet that we're not going to keep quiet no matter what they do.
According to reports, Cabot insists that Vera's activism distracted employees from their work and interfered with natural gas production. However, this 63-year-old grandmother and fearless advocate says she refuses to be intimidated.
I will continue to do it because I live here. I don't want to live with this, and I don't want it for future generations. I don't want it for my children or anyone I know. So I'll continue to do this as long as I can.
Marina Portnaya, RT, Montrose, Pennsylvania.
Well, of course, Vera isn't the only one fighting against the fracking industry, and there have been some battles won. In Texas, a jury awarded $3 million to victims of fracking who proved their health was damaged by a nearby drilling site. A complete ban on fracking was imposed in Vermont, the first state to do so. And a company in Ohio was forced to suspend operations after the authorities launched an investigation into a connection between the drilling and earthquakes. Now, here's what one of the activists behind that development told us.
In 2006, we had a drilling and fracking operation going on in Ohio. And as a result of that, there were some fugitive emissions that it ended up sickening, actually having health effects on myself and a lot of the neighbors here. So that was my wake-up call. I was really confused, honestly, to have such an experience from an industrial operation right close to my home. So that prompted me to look into it and to figure out how or why this was legal. In 2010, a bill passed in our government here in Ohio, which was the largest reform in oil and gas law in our state since 1965. So that was the most recent improvement that was brought about in our law.
Here's
Here in D.C., there are lots of think tanks and pro-business activist groups that are responsible for pushing tons of disastrous policies. Perhaps no other organizations more responsible for as many damaging strategies as the American Legislative Exchange Council, better known as ALEC. This group has been the driving force in enacting some of the most conservative, backwards policies at a state level, from the now infamous stand your ground laws in states like Florida to voter ID laws that disproportionately target minorities. But that's not all. ALEC's attacks on the working class alone have amounted to over 100 anti-worker bills in 31 states just in the last few years. And now, a leaked internal document shows that ALEC is currently tracking 131 bills, which, among other things, aim to drastically scale back alternative energy standards, fossil fuel regulations, and combat opposition to the completion of the Keystone XL oil pipeline. So to discuss what's on the horizon for the shady organization, I'm joined by Brendan Fischer, staff counsel for the Center for Media and Democracy. Thank you so much for coming on, Brendan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So before we get into ALEC a little bit more, what does it mean that this organization's tracking 131 environmental bills? And talk a little bit about how these bills will affect the average American.
Sure. Well, so ALEC for decades has pushed these anti-environment deregulatory bills to benefit ALEC corporate members like Peabody Energy or Koch Industries. Why I think this bill tracking is really important, or the revelation of this bill tracking document is really important, is because ALEC has recently been denying that it tracks bills at all. And these denials may be motivated in part by a possible IRS investigation into ALEC. So ALEC is a charity. As a charity, not only do corporations get a tax write-off for paying ALEC to access and influence state legislators, they also are supposed to be engaged in minimal lobbying. By tracking all of these bills, it sure looks a lot like lobbying. So this could be a further indication that ALEC is in fact under an IRS investigation because their IRS status has been challenged by groups like Common Cause, Center for Media and Democracy, and others.
Super interesting. I know that the EPA recently won a huge Supreme Court case regarding coal regulations state to state across the country. As a result, of course, ALEC is launching a proactive campaign, pretty unprecedented actually in terms of their strategy switching over here. Can you talk about what new campaign they're going to launch to undermine the EPA?
Sure. Well, ALEC is no fan of the EPA. They have a publication called The EPA's Regulatory Trainwreck. They've been after the EPA for years. What they do is try and get state legislation enacted, urging Congress to not allow the EPA to regulate coal companies or utility companies. Their latest tactic, though, is actually moving from the legislative branch to the executive branch. What they're doing is trying to coordinate state attorney generals to sue the EPA, to stop these new proposed rules regulating coal-fired power plants. They had a conference call back in January with John Bruning, who's Nebraska's Attorney General. John Bruning has gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars from coal interests and from energy interests. When he ran for U.S. Senate in 2012, he had a single fundraiser organized by Murray Coal's CEO and raised over $100,000. And now he's at the forefront of these lawsuits against the EPA. And what this really means is that state attorney generals are almost acting as taxpayer-funded law firms for energy interests. They're acting basically on behalf of Peabody Energy, on behalf of American Electric Power, and bringing these lawsuits using taxpayer funds to stop these reasonable efforts to thwart to limit the efforts of climate change.
It's outrageous. I mean, it's really an outrageous maneuver here. I know that they just met in Kansas City. Of course, they had a lot of people protesting that. Is there new kind of front of what we just discussed, what they pushed in Kansas City, this kind of new environmental assault? Was that their main policy prescriptions?
Well, ALEC has 9 task forces. The Energy, Environment, and Agriculture Task Force actually did organize a trip to a coal-fired power plant outside of Kansas City. They also had a number of EPA-related items on the agenda, but there's 9 different task forces. They also are pushing efforts to privatize education, to crack down on unions, to limit union power, and to also drastically cut income taxes.
It's amazing to see the worst of the worst legislation really all comes back to ALEC. It's amazing how much they've been able to succeed. And according to governing.com, about 1,000 bills based on ALEC's language are introduced every year. On average, about 20% get enacted. I mean, How does this compare to other think tanks? Do they just have how do they have such enormous success in enacting these bills?
Yeah, it is really incredible that so many bills are able to get introduced and passed every year. It's testament to ALEC's power. It's testament to that's the reason why corporations continue to fund ALEC despite public outcry. ALEC has lost a lot of corporate members over the last few years as the spotlight has begun to shine on the organization. But many corporations still fund ALEC. They still find it worth their dollars to fund ALEC, and in large part it's because it's so successful. It allows corporations to access and influence state legislators, and on top of that, they get a tax write-off for it because ALEC is a charity.
I mean, is that unique in its model to have corporations actually vote with legislators here? How is that legal?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any other organization that allows that to happen. Corporations and legislators get an equal vote to adopt ALEC model legislation, and if the corporate members of ALEC don't like a bill, it doesn't move forward. So ALEC has tried to rebrand itself as a legislator-driven organization, but all evidence is to the contrary.
Yeah, obviously. And I know the Koch brothers, of course, are huge backers of ALEC. We have about a minute left, but I wanted you to kind of point out some of these other corporate donors behind the organization.
Sure. So the Kochs have been involved for a long time. They got the ALEC Adam Smith Free Enterprise Award back in the 90s. Peabody Energy is also a big ALEC member, as well as BP, ExxonMobil, a lot of the tobacco companies. Enjoy, the electronic cigarette manufacturer, just joined ALEC last year, according to internal documents leaked to The Guardian. And lo and behold, at the latest ALEC meeting, there's a presentation on regulating electronic cigarettes. And it was titled Regulating Electronic Cigarettes Jeffersonian Style.
Jeffersonian style, yeah, ALEC style. Thank you so much for keeping an eye on this horrendous organization. Brendan, really appreciate you coming on.
At least 10 people were arrested protesting against Peabody Coal at its annual shareholder meeting. Activists had purchased shares of Peabody in order to voice opposition to its practices, but they were denied access to the meeting room with executives. Navajo activist Marshall Johnson addressed protesters outside the meeting.
What we're facing back home on Black Mesa, northeast Arizona, they're using our pristine groundwater, sandstone aquifer, for their industrial uses for over 40 years. It's depleted, it's depressurizing our springs, our natural way of livelihood that provided for our cornfields, for our animals. Their way of development of civilizations is all for profit. Yes, it is our way of life that we have to subsidize. We have to basically wear their welfare.
The St. Louis protest comes less than a week after 7 students at Washington University in St. Louis were arrested following a 17-day sit-in against Peabody Energy. CEO Greg Boyce, who sits on the school's board of trustees. This week, Stanford University agreed to purge its $18.7 billion endowment of coal investments following a student-led campaign. In Ohio, hundreds of gallons of drilling fluid have spilled into a creek from a shale well being prepared for fracking. Officials say the leak was discovered Sunday. About 1,600 gallons of the fluid, known as mud, gushed out before the spill was contained Wednesday. Nearby residents were evacuated amidst fears of a natural gas explosion. The company, PDC Energy, said it still plans to move forward with fracking the wells.
Now, the first county in California to put a measure on a ballot to ban fracking. County supervisors gave the ballot issue the green light after a local group got the nearly 2,000 signatures needed for a petition to make the ballot. Central Coast News reporter Cassandra Arsenault is live in San Juan Bautista tonight, where the group San Benito Rising is hosting a meeting. Cassandra?
Well, the organization called San Benito Rising, who got all the signatures for the ballot measure, is meeting right now. They're discussing their next step because even though a ban on fracking is now headed to the ballot, their work has just begun. The supervisors had 3 options last night: accept the initiative at a later date, send the initiative to the voters, or call for a fiscal report to be done. The county supervisors ended up leaving the decision to the voters. It will go on the ballot in November, and Supervisor Jerry Munzer says he had recently worked on an ordinance that increases the level of protection and provisions for air, water, and wildlife from fracking. But if voters aren't satisfied with that, he says they have every right to put it to a vote.
The big pro is obviously the voters are going to decide what they want to see in their county. Two cons I'm actually concerned about. This initiative has the potential of eliminating all oil exploration, including conventional exploration, which is going on now in the southernmost part of the county, and also has the potential of putting the county in a situation where we'll have to defend ourselves in a lawsuit.
And by the lawsuit, he means the act of taking landowners' property, because the right now property owners have the right to allow fracking on their land, but San Benito Rising is already looking into the validity of other lawsuits, one in particular, the Independent Petroleum Association.
That if our folks, if the people of our county have the gumption to exercise their rights and say we don't want this here, they're telling the county they're going to sue them. But we have very, very good attorneys, and they've gone through their memo, and they say there's nothing in this memo that stands up.
Supervisors say the reality is it could cost millions for the county to defend itself if it is taken to court. San Benito Rising says that there's even more work for them to do now. It's up to them to inform the public and get people to go to the ballots and vote. In San Juan Bautista, I'm Cassandra Arsenal, your Central Coast News.
Shipping companies have long relied on heavy oil to propel their vessels, but European leaders are concerned about air pollution, and they're considering restrictions on oil power. So some managers are turning to liquefied natural gas as a cleaner alternative. NHK World's Go Sawahata reports.
This Norwegian ship doesn't emit smoke. It is powered by an LNG. More and more new vessels in Europe use the fuel. LNG is created by cooling natural gas to 162 degrees below zero. Ships using LNG instead of heavy oil cut nitrogen oxide emissions by up to 70% and carbon dioxide by up to 25%. The Norwegian government is encouraging the shift to LNG. It subsidizes up to 80% of construction costs for LNG fuel ships.
I hope that we see that Norway have initiated something that shows the international community that it's possible to do this. It is possible to create a sustainable shipping business based on LNG as a fuel.
The United States is among the countries shifting to LNG-powered ships.
Hull 495 is the first LNG dual-fuel container ship built anywhere in the world.
This LNG fuel container vessel is being constructed in San Diego, on the U.S. West Coast. The move to LNG is driven by increased production of shale gas. As natural gas prices drop, the cost of LNG has fallen to half that of heavy oil. The switch can be profitable to companies even after the cost of building ships that can run on LNG. There are regular events aimed at attracting interest and investment in LNG fuel ships. More marine transport businesses are making the switch.
To see a revolution, bring a new energy source is remarkable. And to be able to make sure that they can still live there and support their economics there and support industries there, it's very rewarding.
Business is also picking up for manufacturers of ship engines, as 1,000 LNG fuel vessels will be built in the world by 2020.
We clearly see a bigger demand for gas-fueled engines and gas-fueled vessels. That the market is growing and it's becoming more global. The question is not why to go for gas, but the question is why not go for gas.
Japan has taken a leadership role in regulating heavy oil to protect the environment. But the country currently has no ships powered by LNG. That's because in Japan, the price tag of the imported fuel is among the highest in the world. It's about 3 times that in the US. Construction work on Japan's first LNG-powered ship started late last year. The shipping company that's commissioned it says it would have been difficult without the government subsidy. The firm decided to make another ship in Europe, where LNG is cheaper than in Japan.
In the future, environmental regulations will only get tougher. We have no choice but to use eco-friendly fuel for our ships.
Strict environment regulations similar to those in place in Western nations will spread to other countries as early as in 2020. Countries are racing against the clock in order to make LNG-powered ships and gain an edge in global maritime transport.